it hadn't been for the clarinet, I might have just been a gangster. Wait, this is Benny Goodman, right? It was on this day in jazz, August 2nd, 1937, that the Benny Goodman Quartet recorded Smile at an RCA Victor studio in Hollywood, California. Information on the recording of Smiles is very sparse, to say, on the internet and other literature. Smiles is a song by Leland Stanford Roberts, commonly known as Lee S. Roberts. He's best known for his composition of Smiles, not a lot of other popular tunes that came out of him. He worked with lyricist J. Will Callahan, and it was written in 1917. So it was a good 20 years later when this was recorded with in Hollywood with this quartet. It's considered a danceable 75 beat per minute, or it can be double timed at 150 beat per minute song. It runs about 2 minutes and 59 seconds, and is in the key of C sharp, D flat, and in the major mode. According to the discography of American historical recordings, when this was recorded on August 2nd, there are 2 takes. The first take shows an unknown status and is not on the master tape, so it could have just been setting up the recording, doing levels, who knows at this point. Could have been anything, but it does not exist. The second take is the master and the only recording for this song, so there are no alternate versions. It's just the 10-inch 78 format that was cut on that day. Benny wanted to be a musician from childhood. Being Jewish, he was able to get music lessons at the local synagogue. His brothers also played, but because they were larger than he was, they also got to play larger instruments. So his brothers got to play the trumpet and tuba, while Benny was left with the smaller instrument, the clarinet. However, from childhood, Benny quickly took to the clarinet, and even in his early teens was considered exceptionally good, not just for his age, but for any age. By his late teens, apparently, he was able to repeat anything he heard. He was able to solo at will, and he was recording at 18 years old. In the early Depression, he was playing in New York, on Broadway, sitting in with local bands, playing for musicals, anything that he could do at the time. However, while his playing was quite mature for his age, his overall personality wasn't. He often goofed around. He had been known to lean back in his chair, almost laying flat while he was playing a solo, and putting his feet up and showing the bottoms of his shoes, which wasn't really looked well upon in the orchestra at that time. He was even known to taunt other woodwind players. If they messed something up, he would play the same thing and play it incorrectly like they did and fix it and laugh at people on stage, all of which did not make him a likable person. And he knew he was talented at that age, and he didn't mind anyone knowing that he knew it. Realizing he wasn't good at working under another directorship, Benny Goodman formed his own orchestra in 1934. Within a year, the orchestra had quickly risen to being one of the hottest bands in the U.S. This new popularity of the Benny Goodman Orchestra set him up for a large tour in 1935. However, just before leaving on tour, he went to a party in Brooklyn where he met pianist Teddy Wilson, who had been doing piano arrangements and things for Billie Holiday. Benny and Teddy turned the party into an impromptu jazz session for the evening, with a third member picking up a suitcase and pretending like it was a drum in lieu of actually having a drum set available to them that night. Teddy Wilson and Benny Goodman hit it off, and Benny, who was already notorious for being hard to work with, really ended up playing with him for the next 50 years. After this impromptu jazz session, Benny reached out and got his impromptu trio set up immediately, bringing in a drummer he had worked with before, Gene Krupa. Krupa had already played with Goodman on a number of times before, but had been reluctant because he had some personality conflicts with Goodman in the past. Presumably, Krupa got over this as he moved on, and they recorded again in 1935. The record was quickly cut with the trio before Goodman left on the tour on the West Coast, and the record sold well. The trio had a hot single with Body and Soul, and it was the label's top seller for 1935. During this vaunted West Coast tour, Teddy would come out during the breaks and play with the trio, and they gained even more in popularity as they toured. To set some context, let me read this quote to you. There cannot be integrated musicians in a band that's playing for a wide audience. Yet, within the intermissions, this band, this audience, does not exist. So this is how, in the time, they were able to get away with Teddy playing with the band. Here's another quote. So Benny Goodman opens with his all-white band. Kids get up and dance. There's an intermission, and then Teddy Wilson comes on. But he's not officially part of the band, so you can say he's been hired to fill time while Goodman Orchestra takes 5. Goodman and George and Gene Krupa play with Wilson, and this trio bit goes over and over again, and it's kind of a sideshow. Then ultimately, Lionel Hampton joins in on vibes, and you have a radical quartet playing to teenagers in Dallas. So Lionel Hampton, referenced in the earlier quote, would ultimately be the last piece that turns this trio into the Benny Goodman Quartet. The trio had been invited to see Lionel Hampton play when they were in LA at a local club called the Paradise Club. Lionel is said to have been on stage playing, not knowing anyone was coming special to see him that night, had noticed them in the crowd, but nothing special. And then he turns, and there's Benny Goodman playing next to me. So Benny apparently just decided to get up on stage and start playing in the middle of the show. They ended up playing 2 hours straight, and that night Goodman came to him asking, look, tomorrow I want you to come to a recording session, RCA Studios with me in Hollywood. Of course, Lionel accepted. What Lionel didn't know is that the trio, now a quartet, was actually in Hollywood recording music for a movie called Hollywood Hotel, which had a lesser-known actor at the time playing a very small bit part named Ronald Reagan. A number of the cuts for it, I've Got a Heart Full of Music, The Man I Love, maybe Handful of Keys, this is all a bit unclear, and the single for Smiles, were potentially used or planned to be used in the movie, and a number of not just songs but scenes were cut from the movie, again because of an interracial or racially mixed group was not deemed appropriate. And even the Billboard magazines had listed at the time that a number of Memphis board censors had scissored a scene, which I'm assuming is cutting at the current time, from the just released musical. So there are songs that could have been popular, could have had more recordings available to us that we may never know because they were censored at the time. By the end of 1938, Krupa's frustrations with Goodman had really gotten out of control. The two were fighting with each other to the point where it actually spilled over onto stage, and they were calling out and taunting each other during performances. Ultimately, this led Krupa to just leave after the end of one of the performances and say, I'm done. They were not to play together again until 1954. However, Krupa went on and had his own success playing with a band. They did have Lionel Hampton step in and play drums for a while when it kind of reduced back to a trio, since we didn't have the xylophone player anymore. But ultimately, that just didn't stay together, and Benny ended up taking on his orchestra and taking care of that for the next 20 to 30 years. So that's the story behind the recording of Smiles on this day in jazz, August 2nd, 1937. If you like this, please subscribe, follow us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, tell your friends, and we'll see you next time on This Day in Jazz. Not well known, didn't make the cut for the final TV show. The group ended up playing and touring together probably for this lesser known